Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Friday edition of our class, Perashat HaShavua, Perashat Korah. Question of the day is, how do you know if your actions are what we call L'Shem Shamayim? We'll get into that as we speak about the famous episode of Korah, his rebellion, the rebellion of his entourage, which includes, of course, Datan v'Abiran, originally on, then he pulled out, and the 250 member group that joined them as well. What were the motivations of these people? What were bothering them? What seemed to be the focus of their rebellion? The Torah doesn't really hide it. It's pretty clear in the Pesukim. If you look right in the beginning, when they gathered, they assembled to challenge Moshe and Aharon. It says, we're in Pasuk Gimal of Perek Tezayin in the beginning of the parasha. And they charged them with the following, Rab Lachem. What we say in Arabic, Hajet, too much, it's enough already. We have a holy congregation, we have a holy nation of people, and of course, God's presence is amongst them. Why are you exalting yourselves? Why are you elevating yourselves on the congregation and nation of God? Seemingly, that's a challenge to the authority, the power, and the positions of Moshe as leader and leading rabbi of the nation, and Aharon as the Kohen HaGadol. If we go on just a little bit more, and we hear the response of Moshe Rabbeinu to them as he created the setting of the challenge the next day, which would be revolve around the chetor at the incense. He tells them, as he's really trying to get them to retrieve, to come back, to take back their position, to reconsider. And he says, you're so fortunate. You're a member of the tribe of Levi. You have the privilege of serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that wasn't enough. You and your assembly have instead decided to challenge. You've also requested kihuna, so you see from Moshe Rabbeinu's response to them and his attempt to cajole them to reconsider that they also obviously were requesting or challenging the priestlyhood or the priestly appointment of Aharon HaKohen. And then when Moshe, as an aside, tried to really convince Datan v'Abiram, you guys don't even belong here. Why would you get yourselves into trouble? Let's talk. And their response, in a very arrogant way, to Moshe was, it's not bad enough that you took us out of the land of milk and honey, referring to Egypt, for us to die in the desert. On top of that, you're trying to dominate, to overcome, to overpower us. So you see from this terminology pretty clearly what their complaint was, what their intent was, what was driving them. And indeed, if you look into the Mefarshim and various commentators, you get all these sentiments that they were out for power. They were challenging the leadership of Moshe Rabbeinu, the Kohen Kehuna Gedolah, the general Kohanim assignments of Aharon and his children, Kehuna Gedolah of Aharon specifically. According to others, they were also challenging the Bechorah, the fact that, and this is where Datan v'Abiran came in from Shevet, and also On ben Pelet originally from Shevet Reuben, challenging the fact, who are you to decide to switch the prestige and status of the Bechorot with the tribe of Levi? They were challenging that decision as well. According to Rashi, brings down the Midrash, the Ramban, and others mention it, but challenging the appointment of one of the heads of one of the tribes, and that was Elisaphat ben Uziel, where the sons of Kehat, of course, are Amram, Yishar, Hebron, and Uziel. Amram's two children, Aharon and Moshe, were appointed to positions of importance. The next son, Korah, which we're told over here is Ben Yishar. Next son is Yishar, should be Korah get some type of important appointment. Instead, he was skipped over. And then Uziel, the youngest of the 4 children, got a son, Elisaphan, who was appointed the head of a part of a tribe. So these were all the contentions of Korah and his assembly. However, ideally, what his true guilt was, as we spoke about in classes in the past, and recordings of this class in the past, is that he, in challenging Moshe Rabbeinu, he challenged HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He challenged the authority of Moshe, and therefore the decision of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to appoint Moshe Rabbeinu to be the conduit of Torah from heaven to earth, and to carry out Torah Shebechtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh and teach it to the people, and to be the head prophet and the prime communicator of God to man, challenged all that. Was challenging HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Of course, the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu, as we know, is one of the tenets of the 13 tenets of Jewish faith, and the fact that it's perfect and unchallengeable, and he's the highest of all prophets. So that's blasphemous, and whatever other many challenges come with that is blasphemous as well. And that's why the famous punishment of the earth swallowing him up, that God tailor-made to Korah and his assembly to obliterate them, to eradicate their memory from this world, was necessary. That essentially was his real sin. However, Hachamim package or present their wrongdoing in different terminologies to try to convey to us a critical message and another wrongful element of the approach of Korah and his assembly. And therefore, we go to Pirkei Avot, the very end, the 5th chapter of Pirkei Avot, depends on your version and the book that you're reading from. It could be Mishnah number 17, 18, 20, 21, but it's one of the last Mishnayot in the 5th chapter, which means of all of Pirkei Avot. And it famously says, Kol machloket she'ishem shamayim l'shem shamayim sofaha le'etkayem v'she'ena l'shem shamayim en sofaha le'etkayem. Literally, any argument, any dispute, any fight that's for l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, sofaha, in the end, le'etkayem. Seemingly, that means that it will endure, it will last, it will exist. And any argument or dispute that's not l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven, in terms of intent and the drive of those who are on the two sides of the dispute, and also en sofaha le'etkayem. In the end, it will not last, endure, and exist. And the Mishnah goes on to cite examples of each side of this principle. Ezu hi machloket shehi l'shem shamayim, zo machloket hillel v'shamay. A quote-unquote shem shamayim dispute is the example given. The paradigm for that is Hillel and Shammai, and by extension, their schools of study, Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel. V'she'enah l'shem shamayim, zo machloket Korah v'chol adato. And the quintessential example and model of a dispute that is not l'shem shamayim, not for the sake of heaven, so to speak, is the 1 hour parasha, Korah and his assembly and his following. So what exactly does the Mishnah mean by a machloket that is l'shem shamayim, for the sake of heaven? They don't inform us, but it's pretty not so difficult to figure out. And the Mefarshim, the various commentators, the Rambam and the Bin Abajab and Bartanura, etc., simply explain as follows. If you have a dispute where the drive and the objective, the intent of each side is simply to reach the truth, it's simply to discover the emet, to fend for the truth in terms of the way they see things, the truth of Hashem, his Torah in the world, that's their drive, that's what's motivating them. So tenaciously pursue this argument and this dispute, and that's what's behind it, seeking the truth. Sofalet Chayim, that's a machloket where the participants in that dispute will, they'll last, they'll endure, they will exist, they'll be successful they get a nice pat on the back. On the other hand, if their drive is out of the sense of arrogance, anger, vengeance, quest for honor, for power, for reputation, for money, and simply to defeat the other side and to be victorious, that's not L'Shem Shamayim. And that's a very interesting formula. And that seems clear. And that's Eina Sofa L'Hitkayim. It's not going to endure until last. The Rabbi Avadian Bar Tanura brings another very nice explanation. One is En Sofami. We look at that to be the consequence of the dispute. Consequence, the ramifications of something that is either L'Shem Shamayim or not, is what the end will be, the end result. Sofa, it's end. He says another way of looking at it is the word sofa is referring to the objective. What was the sof? What were these people trying to get at? If their objective in this dispute, if their sof was goodness, it would last. So the sof is the actual objective. What was sofa? What was their intent? What was their motivation? What were they trying to get at? What was their final goal? In any case, you come back to Korah. And obviously, you see, it was not L'Shem Shamayim. They were out for power. It was the impetus was arrogance and vengeance. They were out for themselves. They simply wanted to defeat their competitor. Now, if you look even a little more deeply into that, I have a question on behalf of Korah and his assembly. Perhaps Korah can say that the means that I chose, the end is justified by the means, right? Right? The end justifies the means. I really believe in what I'm doing. I believe in what I'm doing. And therefore, even if I go about it, seems to be arrogantly, I want to defeat my competitor. I seem to be seeking power and money. But you know what? I really believe they're wrong. And therefore, I think what I'm doing is okay. And this is an approach that people have, where the end the means are justified by the end, right? What I'm trying to get at, the final goal, the end, I can justify whatever means I take to get there because of the end, right? So the end justifies the path that I take. The final point, my destination and my objective justifies whatever path I take to get there. Why not? If I really believe that that's the truth, I can speak Lashon Hara. You know why? Because the guy is wrong, he's evil. I can try to dethrone him and undermine his power and do whatever it takes to do that. I can play rough because I believe he's wrong. And, beside Lashon Hara and defaming and even being disingenuous and not honest and not forthright, all those things, because, my final objective is the truth. So what's wrong with that? Isn't that L'Shem Shamayim? And the truth is that's what makes these two words, L'Shem Shamayim, two of the most dangerous words in our entire religion. Now, of course, you can give a technical answer to this. It can't be a mizvah haba ba'avera. There's no such thing as a mizvah that comes through averot. But to that you can say that sometimes Lashon Hara is even permissible. Depends on, why are you entering the Lashon Hara? Maybe you can even lie for a reason. So what's the real then? We have to crystallize this L'Shem Shamayim approach. And what a mahloket, a dispute of L'Shem Shamayim really is, besides the fact that I have a great desire for the truth, how do I filter out the feelings? And by the way, that in and of itself is very difficult for a person to be honest with himself and try to, that internal struggle. Am I motivated at all by arrogance, by anger, by vengeance? Just that degree of honesty in and of itself is pretty difficult for an average person. That exercise is gut-wrenching. How do you discover whether you're being arrogant or not? But let's say you got past that And now you really feel you're Leshem Shamayim because I have an end goal and that's the truth that I believe in. However I get there is okay. And that doesn't seem to be right. And so we need to sort of filter down further to crystallize what this Leshem Shamayim, that is the right way to go about a dispute, really mean. And that simply can be discovered by looking at the positive example. And that is the example of Hillel and Shammai. And the Gemara in Eruvin, Daf Yud Gimel Amud Bet 13b, describes the fact that Hillel, and this is why, by the way, the Gemara says that Bat Kol came from Shammai and said Hillel, they're both Divrei Elohim Hayim, words of the living God, but the halakha will be decided like Hillel. It will be established like Hillel. And the Gemara says why? Because what Hillel used to do was present both sides, his and Shammai's approach. And by extension, there's schools of thought, Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel used to do the same thing. And then Hillel actually presented Shammai's approach first. He presented his approach first. And by doing so, Hillel really demonstrated that he's disputing and he really has a side to his argument. He believes he's correct and he's fighting for his position. But you know what? He really is not on another side. He's not on the other side. He's on the very same side as Shammai. That true sense of truth, of seeking the truth, and of real pure intent is what awarded Hillel for, at least so far in our world, almost eternally, to establish the halakha like him. And Rabbi Sachs, alav shalom, points out in his comment on this Mishnah that ultimately Hillel and Shammai were on the very same side. They were both on the side of truth. They were both on the side of heaven. It happens to be that they had differences of opinions. They were well-rounded, they were fair differences, but they realized what they shared in common outweighed their few differences of opinion. And unfortunately, that's not the way it goes in arguments in the midst of our nation, Am Yisrael, in today's world, and going back historically for many centuries. We're devout people, we're, so to speak, God-fearing people on both sides. It's a big problem. And I'll quote you a few lines from Rabbi Sachs. He says, the problem arises when theological and philosophical debates transform themselves into battle for power, a total defeat of opponents. They seem to be for the sake of heaven, Hashem Shamayim, on their surface, but really they're fueled by a desire to crush the opposition. And they don't see their opponents as being words of the living God, Elohim Hayim. Blasphemous, things that can't be tolerated. What happens is when one side believes that the other side can't be tolerated, must be crushed, must be obliterated, he must be victorious in order to wipe out the other side, then the arguer himself transforms his intent to no longer being Leshem Shamayim. You can't possibly be seeking the truth if you don't believe that the other person is seeking the truth as well. If you believe simply that I can justify my Lashon Hara, I can justify my backdoor, disingenuous, sneaky behavior because he's not holding in the right place. And therefore, to get to the truth, I got to do whatever I got to do. You, my friend, are no longer L'Shem Shamayim. We're not talking about Reform Judaism. We're not talking about something that's blasphemous. We're talking about two different sides of people that really love God and want to get to the final truth of God and his Torah. You could think he's completely wrong, and you can try to defeat his opinion, but you can't try to you can't have your motivating impetus to be victorious only, because that's when you transform yourself to be a non-L'Shem Shamayim Machloket. Hillel and Shammai believed in their positions and argued for them, but they were really on the same side. They saw what bonded them was outweighed much more what separated them. That is a fundamental problem in Am Yisrael today, and this is why we can have different positions and sects and movements, but when we have them with an intent to try to defeat the other movement and eradicate it, we're no longer L'Shem Shamayim. If we want to fend for the truth, believe in it, but also believe that the other person deserves the respect and tolerance and the right to strive for the truth the way he wants to, and hug and kiss him at the end of the mahloket, that truly is a mahloket, L'Shem Shamayim, and that is as opposed to Korah and his company in our Perashat. Shabbat Shalom.